The morning bell chimed through the corridors of Galactic University Station Omega-7, and Tom Bradley hurried toward his advanced comparative physiology class. His backpack bounced against his shoulders as he navigated, the curved hallways filled with students from dozens of different worlds. A group of tall, blue-skinned Alterans glided past him, their crystalline bodies, catching the artificial sunlight that streamed through the station's massive viewing ports. Near the classroom entrance, several small Corthex chatted in their pitched language while their large eyes tracked the movement of other students. Tom had been at the university for 3 months now, and he still felt amazed by the diversity of life forms that called this place home. As one of only 12 humans in the entire student body, he often drew curious stares from his classmates. Most had never seen a human before, and many seemed unsure what to make of him. He didn't mind the attention much, though sometimes he wished he could blend in better with the crowd. Professor Quillen stood at the front of the lecture hall, his translucent form shimmering slightly as he organized his materials. The Alteran professor was known for his innovative teaching methods and his ability to make even the most complex biological concepts accessible to students from vastly different evolutionary backgrounds. Tom had chosen this class specifically because of Quillen's reputation, hoping to learn more about the incredible variety of life that existed throughout the galaxy. "Good morning, students," Professor Quillen began, his voice carrying a musical quality that was typical of his species. "Today marks the beginning of your major semester project, one that will challenge your understanding of comparative biology and force you to think beyond the limitations of your own physiological experiences." The classroom fell silent as students leaned forward in their seats. Major projects at Galactic University were known to be both challenging and transformative, often leading to breakthrough discoveries or significant shifts in scientific understanding. Tom felt a flutter of excitement in his chest as he pulled out his note-taking device. "You will be working in groups of 3, the professor continued, each group containing students from different species backgrounds. Your task is to conduct comprehensive physiological analyses of each team member, documenting reaction times, sensory capabilities, metabolic rates, physical limitations, and any unique biological adaptations your species might possess." A low murmur of conversation began to ripple through the classroom as students started to consider the implications of such detailed biological examination. Tom glanced around, wondering who his teammates might be. He noticed that many of the other students were already forming groups with friends or classmates they knew well. "The purpose of this exercise," Professor Quillen explained, raising his voice slightly to regain attention, "is not simply to collect data. You must analyze your findings in the context of each species' evolutionary history and environmental pressures. What adaptations allowed your ancestors to survive and thrive? How do these adaptations manifest in your current physiology? Most importantly, what can we learn from the similarities and differences between species that evolved under completely different conditions?" Tom raised his hand tentatively. "Professor, what kind of equipment will we have access to for these measurements?" "An excellent question, Mr. Bradley," Quillen replied. "You will have full access to our physiological testing laboratory, which includes reaction time analyzers, sensory threshold detectors, metabolic monitors, and strength measurement devices. All equipment has been calibrated to work safely with the known physiology of species currently enrolled at the university." The professor began calling out group assignments, and Tom listened carefully for his name. When it came, he felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation. Group 7 will consist of Tom Bradley, Nira of the Delphinian Collective, and Gex from the Corthec Educational Consortium. Tom looked around until he spotted his new teammates. Nira was easy to identify among the Delphinians present, her graceful form and translucent blue skin making her stand out even among her own species. She moved with the fluid elegance that came from millions of years of aquatic evolution, her gill slits fluttering slightly as she breathed the station's carefully regulated atmosphere. Gex was smaller than most of the other students, typical of the Corthic species that had evolved on low-gravity moons throughout their home system. His large, dark eyes seemed to take in everything at once, and Tom had heard that Cortex possessed exceptional mathematical and analytical abilities that made them valuable contributors to any scientific endeavor after class ended. The three students found a quiet corner of the student commons to introduce themselves properly. Tom had interacted with both Delphinians and Cortex before, but never in such an intimate academic setting. He wondered what they thought of humans and whether they had any preconceived notions about his species. "I must admit," Nira said her voice carrying the melodic tones common to her people, "I know very little about human physiology. Your species is relatively new to galactic academics, is it not?" Tom nodded. "We only made first contact about 50 years ago, and it's taken this long for our educational systems to become compatible with galactic standards. I'm actually part of the first full exchange program." Gex tilted his head slightly, a gesture that Tom had learned indicated curiosity among his species. "What is your homeworld like?" "I've heard conflicting reports about the conditions on Earth." "It's probably pretty different from what you're used to," Tom replied with a smile. "Heavier gravity than here on the station, and our atmosphere has a pretty high oxygen content. The weather can be unpredictable, and we have seasons that change the temperature and environmental conditions throughout the year." "Fascinating," Nira murmured. "Delphos Prime maintains very stable conditions year-round. Our oceans provide excellent temperature regulation, and our weather patterns are quite predictable." They spent the next hour planning their approach to the project. They decided to start with basic measurements and work their way up to more complex analyses. Tom suggested they begin the following day in the physiology lab, giving them time to review the available equipment and plan their testing protocols. As they prepared to part ways, Tom felt optimistic about the project. His teammates seemed intelligent and curious, and he looked forward to learning about their unique biological adaptations. He had no idea that this seemingly routine academic exercise would soon reveal truths about human physiology that would fundamentally change how the galaxy viewed his species. The physiology laboratory buzzed with quiet activity as student groups began their testing procedures. Tom arrived early, eager to explore the sophisticated equipment that lined the walls of the spacious room. Delicate sensors hung from articulated arms, and monitoring screens displayed readouts in dozens of different galactic languages. The air smelled faintly of ozone and cleaning solutions, giving the space a clinical but not unpleasant atmosphere. Nira glided in shortly after, her movements creating small ripples in the thin layer of moisture that her environmental suit projected around her body to keep her skin properly hydrated. She carried a waterproof data pad and seemed fascinated by the various testing apparatus available to them. Gex scurried in last, his small frame nearly hidden behind a stack of reference materials and calibration guides. His large eyes darted from machine to machine as he quickly assessed the technical specifications of each device. "I have reviewed the equipment manuals," Gex announced in his precise, high-pitched voice. "The reaction time analyzer should provide accurate measurements down to 0.001 seconds. The grip strength tester can measure forces up to 500 standard units, which should be sufficient for any biological organism we might encounter." Tom nodded and approached the reaction time testing station. The device looked simple enough, consisting of a chair, a small screen, and a response pad with a single button. According to the instructions, subjects would see a light flash on the screen and press the button as quickly as possible. The machine would measure the time between stimulus and response with exceptional precision. "Who wants to go first?" Tom asked. "I shall establish a baseline," Gex volunteered, settling into the testing chair. His small hands barely reached the response pad comfortably, but he managed to position himself properly. The test ran through 10 trials, and his average reaction time came out to 0.237 seconds. Well within the normal range for Corthic physiology, Nira went next, her graceful fingers dancing over the response pad with fluid precision. Her average time was 0.194 seconds, slightly faster than Gex, but still typical for aquatic species that had evolved to respond quickly to changes in water pressure and current. Then it was Tom's turn. He settled into the chair and placed his hand over the response button, trying to relax and clear his mind. The first light flashed, and he pressed the button immediately. The machine beeped and displayed his time. 0.042 seconds. Gex blinked his large eyes rapidly. That seems quite fast. Perhaps there was a calibration error. They ran the test again, and Tom's second attempt yielded an even faster time, 0.038 seconds. His average across 10 trials came to 0.041 seconds, nearly 6 times faster than his teammates. The equipment must be malfunctioning, Nira said, though she sounded uncertain. No biological organism should be capable of such rapid neural processing. They moved on to the grip strength tester, hoping for more normal results. The machine consisted of a metal handle connected to 4 sensors that could measure crushing strength with great accuracy. Gex went first, squeezing the handle with all his might and achieving a respectable 47 standard units of force. Nira's aquatic musculature proved surprisingly strong, generating 63 units. Tom grasped the handle and squeezed gently, not wanting to damage the delicate equipment. The display immediately jumped to 112 units. He released his grip quickly, alarmed by the high reading. I was barely trying, he said apologetically. Let me be more careful. No, please continue with normal effort, Gex said, his voice filled with scientific curiosity. We need accurate measurements. Tom squeezed again, this time using what he considered normal strength. The display climbed rapidly, 200, 300, 400 units. He stopped at 427 units, well beyond the machine's expected range for biological organisms. His teammates stared at the readout in silence. Finally, Nira spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. Tom, what kind of work did your ancestors perform on your homeworld? Just normal stuff, Tom replied, confused by the question. Farming, building, hunting when necessary for food. Pretty typical survival activities, I think. They continued with sensory testing, hoping to find something closer to normal ranges. The auditory threshold detector would play sounds at decreasing volumes until the subject could no longer hear them. Gex and Nira both had hearing ranges, appropriate for their species, with some variations based on their evolutionary environments. When Tom put on the headphones, the results proved even more unusual. He could detect sounds well below the threshold that the equipment was designed to measure. Frequencies that barely registered on the most sensitive monitoring devices came through clearly to his ears. The visual acuity test produced similar anomalies. In normal lighting conditions, Tom's eyesight seemed reasonably typical, though perhaps slightly sharper than average. But when they dimmed the lights to test night vision capabilities, something extraordinary happened. Objects that were completely invisible to his teammates remained clearly visible to Tom. He could read text and identify small objects in lighting conditions that left Nira and Gex effectively blind. This is remarkable, Gex murmured, making rapid notes on his datapad. Your sensory capabilities exceed those of most nocturnal predator species in our database. The pain tolerance test proved the most disturbing of all. The device used controlled electrical impulses to stimulate nerve endings, allowing researchers to map sensitivity thresholds safely. Standard protocol called for subjects to rate pain on a scale from 1 to 10 and stop the test when discomfort became unbearable. Gex lasted until level 4 before asking to stop. Nira managed level 6 before the stimulation became too intense to continue. Tom sat calmly through level 8, occasionally commenting that he felt a mild tingling sensation. At level 10, the maximum the machine could produce, he simply shrugged. It feels like a gentle massage, he said honestly. Should it hurt more? His teammates exchanged worried glances. They had begun the day expecting to conduct a routine comparative analysis of 3 similar species adapted to different environments. Instead, they found themselves documenting capabilities that seemed to transcend normal biological limitations. Tom, Nira said carefully, you mentioned that your homeworld has heavier gravity than the station. How much heavier? Tom thought for a moment. About 3 times what we have here, I think. It's one of the things that took some getting used to when I arrived. Everything feels so light and easy to move around. Gex nearly dropped his datapad. 3 times standard gravity? But that would mean your bone density, muscle development, cardiovascular system, all of it would need to be. He trailed off, his mind racing through the implications. As they packed up their equipment for the day, Tom noticed that his teammates had grown unusually quiet. They seemed to be avoiding direct eye contact with him, and their conversation had shifted to technical discussions about equipment calibration and data accuracy. He wondered if he had done something wrong or if the unusual test results had somehow invalidated their project. The last thing he wanted was to cause problems for his new friends or compromise their academic work. If the equipment was malfunctioning, surely they could repeat the tests with different machines. What Tom didn't realize was that his teammates were beginning to suspect the equipment was working perfectly, and that thought terrified them more than any mechanical failure ever could. Late into the station's artificial night cycle, Nira and Gex sat in the university's restricted research section, surrounded by floating holographic displays showing classified galactic database entries. Neither had been able to sleep after the day's testing, and both felt compelled to investigate what they had witnessed. Gex's small fingers moved rapidly across the access terminal while Nira watched the data streams with growing alarm. "There," Gex whispered, his voice barely audible in the quiet archive room. "Planetary classification records for Sol 3, also designated as Earth." The hologram that materialized above their table made Nira's gill slits flutter with anxiety. A 3-dimensional model of Tom's homeworld rotated slowly, its surface marked with warning symbols that indicated extreme hazard levels. Red text scrolled alongside the image, listing environmental conditions that seemed impossible for any civilized species to survive. "Gravity coefficient, 2.97 standard units," Gex read aloud, his voice shaking slightly. "Atmospheric. Composition, 21% free oxygen, 78% nitrogen, with trace amounts of noble gases. Surface temperature variation, -40 to +50 degrees standard. Precipitation varies from frozen crystalline structures to liquid water storms with destructive wind velocities exceeding 200 units per hour." Nira covered her face with her webbed hands. Those conditions would kill most galactic citizens within minutes. The oxygen concentration alone would be toxic to over 90% of known species. They scrolled through more data, each entry more disturbing than the last. Earth's classification as a Class 12 deathworld placed it in the most extreme category. Of planetary hazards, the database noted that worlds of this classification were considered unsuitable for colonization or even scientific study without extensive protective equipment and support systems. "Look at this section about native life forms," Gex said, his large eyes reflecting the holographic display. "Apex predators capable of pursuing prey across vast distances. Pack hunters with sophisticated tactical coordination. Solitary ambush. Predators that can remain motionless for hours before attacking. Venomous creatures whose toxins can cause paralysis or death within minutes." The more they read, the more impossible it seemed that Tom could be from such a place. He seemed gentle and friendly, always careful to move slowly around smaller students and quick to offer help when someone struggled with heavy objects. How could someone so kind come from a world that the database described as a hellscape of constant danger? "There is more," Gex continued, accessing deeper files that required special research permissions. "Biological analysis of the dominant species, designated as Homo sapiens sapiens, also known as humans. The anatomical data that appeared before them defied everything they thought they knew about biology. Human bone density exceeded that of most construction materials. Their cardiovascular systems could function efficiently under crushing gravitational forces. Their nervous systems processed information at speeds that approached artificial intelligence capabilities. Their immune systems could adapt to and neutralize biological threats that would devastate entire populations of other species. According to this," Nira said, her voice barely a whisper, "humans are classified as persistence predators. They literally chase their prey until it dies of exhaustion. Some can maintain pursuit for distances exceeding 50 kilometers without rest. Meanwhile, Tom finished his evening meal in the station's main dining area, unaware that his innocent participation in a school project had triggered a research session that was fundamentally altering his teammates' perception of reality. He had noticed that Nira and Gex seemed distracted during dinner, but he attributed their quiet behavior to fatigue from the day's testing. After eating, Tom decided to take his usual evening walk around the station's main habitat ring. The circular corridor stretched for several kilometers, providing a pleasant route for exercise and relaxation. Most students use the automated transport pods to traverse such distances, but Tom enjoyed the physical activity and the chance to see different sections of the station. He set off at what he considered a leisurely pace, nodding politely to the few other students he encountered along the way. The artificial gravity felt light under his feet, making each step feel effortless and springy. The journey that would take most students 30 minutes by transport pod, Tom completed on foot in 25 minutes without raising his heart rate or breathing heavily. What Tom didn't realize was that security cameras tracked his movement throughout the station, and the footage was automatically reviewed by monitoring systems designed to detect unusual activities. His casual jog around the habitat ring triggered algorithmic alerts because his speed consistently matched that of the transport pods designed for efficient passenger movement. The next day brought their most revealing test yet. Professor Quillen had arranged for each project group to demonstrate basic physical capabilities in the station's gymnasium. The exercise was meant to provide baseline data about locomotion, coordination, and general fitness across different species. Tom arrived at the gym to find his teammates already there, though both seemed unusually nervous and kept checking their data recording equipment multiple times. Other student groups were scattered around the large space, conducting their own demonstrations under the watchful eyes of several faculty members. "We need to document your movement patterns and physical capabilities," Gex explained, though his usual scientific enthusiasm seemed strained. "Simple tasks, lifting, carrying, jumping, running, nothing too complex." They started with basic lifting exercises using standardized weights that were marked in galactic units. The heaviest available weight was labeled as suitable for testing the strongest known species. Tom picked it up casually with one hand, holding it away from his body to demonstrate his grip strength. "How much does this weigh?" he asked. 250 standard units, Nira replied faintly. "That weight normally requires anti-gravity assistance for safe handling." Tom shrugged and transferred the weight to his other hand, then back again, treating the massive object like a minor inconvenience. "It feels pretty light in this gravity. Should I try something heavier?" Before they could respond, another student group nearby had an equipment malfunction. A large piece of testing apparatus, roughly the size and weight of a small transport vehicle, began falling toward a young Korthek who had been adjusting its settings. The heavy machine tumbled from its mounting bracket with a speed that made intervention seem impossible. Tom moved without thinking. One moment he was standing beside his teammates, and the next he was across the room, his hands wrapped around the falling equipment, stopping its descent mere centimeters from the terrified student's head. The entire gymnasium fell silent as everyone stared at what had just happened. Tom gently lowered the heavy apparatus to the floor and turned to check on the shaken Korthek. "Are you okay?" That looked like it would have hurt. The young student could only stare up at Tom with wide, frightened eyes. Around the gymnasium, other students began backing away, their conversations dying to frightened whispers. Tom looked around in confusion, wondering why everyone seemed so scared. "Tom," Nira said, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and terror, "do you realize what you just did? Helped someone?" Tom replied, genuinely puzzled by the reaction his simple act of assistance had provoked. What he didn't understand was that he had just moved faster than most of the other students could properly see, covering a distance of 20 meters in under 2 seconds, and then casually stopped the fall of an object that weighed more than most of them combined. To the civilized species of the galaxy, he had just demonstrated capabilities that seemed supernatural and terrifying. The gymnasium incident spread through the university's communication networks faster than Tom could have imagined possible. Within hours, every student on the station had seen the security footage of a human moving with impossible speed to prevent what would have been a fatal accident. The recording played on personal devices throughout the corridors, each viewing accompanied by hushed conversations and fearful glances. Tom sat alone in his dormitory room, staring out at the stars through his small viewport. He had tried to attend his afternoon classes, but found himself facing empty seats as other students made excuses to avoid sharing space with him. Even the professors seemed uncomfortable, their usual friendly demeanor replaced by nervous politeness and careful distance. A soft chime announced an incoming message on his communication terminal. Tom hoped it might be from his teammates who had disappeared shortly after the gymnasium incident without explanation. Instead, the message came from university security, requesting his immediate presence in the administrative offices. The walk through the station's corridors felt like a journey through a ghost town. Students who normally filled the hallways had found other routes or simply stayed in their quarters. Those few he encountered pressed themselves against the walls as he passed, their eyes wide with poorly concealed fear. Director Vrex, a distinguished Ultron who served as the university's chief administrator, waited for him in a conference room alongside several other faculty members and two individuals Tom didn't recognize. Their uniforms suggested they were from some kind of galactic authority, though he couldn't identify which organization. "Mr. Bradley," Director Vrex began, his crystalline voice carrying an undertone of tension, "we need to discuss some concerns that have arisen regarding your enrollment at this institution." Tom settled into the chair across from them, noting how all the other occupants seemed to lean slightly away from him. "Is this about what happened in the gymnasium?" "I was just trying to help." "Yes, we understand your intentions were benevolent," one of the uniformed officials said. "However, the capabilities you demonstrated have raised significant questions about your species' classification within galactic society." They activated a holographic display that showed the security footage from multiple angles, slowing down Tom's movement until his rescue became a framed sequence. Even in slow motion, his speed seemed incredible, and the casual way he handled the massive piece of equipment looked impossible. "According to our analysis," the second official continued, "you covered 22 meters in 1.4 seconds and stopped the fall of an object, weighing approximately 800 standard units. These capabilities exceed those of any known civilian species." Tom frowned, genuinely confused. "I don't understand what you're implying. Are you suggesting I'm not really a student?" Director Vrex exchanged glances with the officials before speaking again. "Mr. Bradley, are you familiar with the galactic classification system for inhabited worlds?" "Not really," Tom admitted. "I know there are different categories based on environmental conditions, but I've never studied the details." The holographic display shifted to show Earth's database entry, complete with its Class 12 Deathworld designation and the extensive warnings about environmental hazards. Tom stared at the rotating image of his homeworld, surprised by how threatening it looked when presented with clinical scientific detachment. "Your planet is classified as one of the most dangerous worlds known to galactic science," the first official explained. "The gravitational forces, atmospheric composition, temperature variations, and biological threats make it unsuitable for habitation by any civilized species." Tom felt a growing sense of unease as he began to understand the implications. "You're saying other species can't live on Earth?" "Mr. Bradley, most galactic citizens would die within hours of exposure to your world's environment," Director Vrex said gently. "The oxygen concentration alone would be toxic to over 90% of known species. The gravitational forces would crush the skeletal structures of most beings. The temperature variations would cause fatal thermal shock." The room fell silent as Tom processed this information. He had never thought of Earth as particularly dangerous. It was simply home. The idea that his normal world would be lethal to most of the galaxy's inhabitants seemed impossible to accept. "But that doesn't explain why everyone is afraid of me," Tom said finally. "I'm not dangerous to anyone here." The second official leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Bradley, Beings evolved to survive on Class 12 deathworlds are classified as potential military assets by most galactic governments. The physical capabilities required to thrive in such environments make individuals from such worlds incredibly formidable by galactic standards. Are you saying you think I'm some kind of weapon? We're saying that your species possesses capabilities that most civilized beings associate with military hardware rather than biological organisms, Director Vrex explained. Your reaction times exceed those of most automated defense systems. Your strength surpasses that of industrial machinery. Your sensory capabilities rival those of advanced surveillance equipment. Tom stood up abruptly, causing several people in the room to flinch involuntarily. The reaction hurt more than any of the accusations they had made. I've never hurt anyone in my life. I go out of my way to be gentle and careful around other students. I was trying to help someone today, not threaten anyone. We believe your intentions are genuine, the first official said carefully. However, intentions can change and capabilities remain constant. The presence of a Deathworlder on a civilian station has created significant security concerns among the student population and their home governments. The meeting continued for another hour, with Tom answering questions about human society, Earth's environment, and his own background. Throughout the discussion, he found himself growing increasingly frustrated by their assumption that his physical capabilities automatically made him dangerous. As he finally left the administrative offices, Tom realized that his teammates had probably discovered similar information about Earth and humanity. Their strange behavior and sudden disappearance finally made sense. Though the knowledge brought no comfort, walking back toward his dormitory, Tom passed the student commons and caught sight of Nira and Gex sitting at a corner table with several other students. They were deep in animated conversation, their datapads displaying what looked like research materials and database entries. He approached their table, hoping to finally have an honest conversation about what they had learned. As he drew closer, he heard fragments of their discussion that made his heart sink. The database says they're persistence predators, one of the other students was saying. They literally hunt their prey to death by chasing it until it collapses from exhaustion. Their bone density is higher than most starship hull materials, Gex added, his voice filled with a mixture of fascination and fear. Their immune systems can adapt to biological threats that would cause planetary pandemics among other species. But he seemed so friendly, Nira said quietly. How can someone so gentle come from such a terrifying background? Tom stopped just outside their conversation. Circle, close enough to hear but not yet visible to the group. Part of him wanted to interrupt and defend himself, to explain that humans weren't monsters despite their impressive capabilities. Another part of him simply wanted to retreat to his room and avoid the uncomfortable truth that his mere existence had become a source of fear for people he considered friends. Maybe that's the most frightening part, another student replied. If Deathworlders can seem harmless and friendly, how would we ever know when we're in danger? Tom turned away from the table and walked quickly toward his quarters, finally understanding why the corridors had seemed so empty and why other students avoided him. In trying to help someone, he had accidentally revealed that humans possessed capabilities that the galactic community found terrifying. His simple act of kindness had transformed him from a curious foreign student into something his classmates viewed as a potential threat. Tom spent the night staring at the ceiling of his dormitory room, weighing his options. He could request an immediate transfer back to Earth, leaving behind his studies and the dream of becoming a bridge between human and galactic science. He could try to hide his capabilities better, though the gymnasium incident had made that impossible. Or he could face the fear and mistrust directly, using the scientific method that had brought them to this point to find a path forward. By morning, his decision was made. Tom composed a message to Professor Quillen, requesting a meeting to discuss expanding their original project into something more comprehensive. If the galactic community feared humans because they didn't understand them, then understanding would be the key to moving beyond that fear. Professor Quillen agreed to meet in his private office, a space filled with specimens and research materials from across the galaxy. The Alteron professor seemed genuinely curious about Tom's request, though he maintained the careful distance that had become common among faculty members since the incident. "I want to continue the project," Tom said without preamble. "But I want to expand it into a full study of human physiology, open to review by the entire university community." Professor Quillen's crystalline form shimmered with surprise. "Mr. Bradley, such a study would require you to submit to extensive testing and examination. The results would become part of the permanent galactic database. Are you certain you want that level of scrutiny? The alternative is living as something people fear because they don't understand," Tom replied. "If I'm going to be the first human most of these species have met, I'd rather be known for accurate information than wild speculation." Within days, the expanded study had attracted the attention of xenobiologists from across the university. Tom found himself working with research teams from multiple departments, each focused on different aspects of human biology. The testing was more extensive than anything he had experienced before, but he submitted to each examination willingly, knowing that the data would help replace fear with facts. The cardiovascular testing revealed that human hearts functioned as incredibly efficient pumps capable of maintaining circulation under gravitational forces that would be fatal to most species. The muscular system analysis showed that human strength came not from unusual size, but from extremely dense muscle fibers and efficient neural control systems. Dr. Kella, a renowned Vorthan physiologist, supervised the neurological testing with barely contained amazement. "Your reaction times aren't just fast," she explained to Tom as they reviewed the results. "Your entire nervous system processes and responds to stimuli faster than most species' automated defense systems. This isn't just adaptation to dangerous conditions, it's evolution toward active threat management." The sensory testing proved equally revealing. Tom's enhanced hearing and vision weren't supernatural abilities but natural adaptations to an environment where detecting threats quickly could mean the difference between life and death. His pain tolerance reflected a nervous system designed to function effectively even under extreme stress or injury. As the weeks passed and data accumulated, something unexpected began to happen. Instead of becoming more frightened by the extent of human capabilities, the research teams began to develop a different perspective. They started to see Tom not as a dangerous predator, but as a remarkable example of biological adaptation under extreme pressures. "Do you realize what this means?" Dr. Kella asked during one of their evening discussion sessions. "Your species has evolved capabilities that most of us can only achieve through technology. But you've also maintained social cooperation, intellectual curiosity, and ethical behavior. That combination is extraordinarily rare in evolutionary biology." The breakthrough moment came during a demonstration that Tom had initially dreaded. Professor Quillen had requested a test of Tom's physical strength under controlled conditions, using equipment specially designed to handle forces far beyond normal biological ranges. Tom worried that the display would reinforce fears about human capabilities. Instead, the test became a lesson in restraint. As Tom carefully applied increasing force to the testing apparatus, the researchers watching began to understand something crucial. Every movement was controlled and precise. Every action was carefully modulated to avoid damage to the delicate equipment or injury to anyone nearby. The same capabilities that made humans formidable also made them incredibly aware of their own strength and its potential consequences. Throughout this entire testing process, Professor Quillen announced to his assembled colleagues, "Mr. Bradley has demonstrated extraordinary care and consideration for everyone around him. His strength is matched by his gentleness. His speed is balanced by his patience. His sensory capabilities are used not for predation but for protection." Nira and Gex, who had initially avoided Tom after learning about his species' Deathworld origins, gradually became involved in the expanded research project. Their initial fear transformed into scientific fascination as they began to understand the true implications of human evolution. "I owe you an apology," Nira said during one of their late-night research sessions. "When I learned about Earth's classification, I allowed fear to override rational thinking. I forgot that evolution creates not just capability but also character. The final phase of the project involved Tom demonstrating human protective instincts. When researchers created simulated emergency scenarios, his responses were immediate and focused entirely on ensuring the safety of others. His enhanced capabilities weren't used for dominance or aggression, but for rescue and protection. This changes everything we thought we knew about Deathworld evolution, Dr. Kella observed during the project's concluding presentation. Most theories assumed that survival on extreme worlds would produce selfish, aggressive species. Instead, we see that the most dangerous environments can create beings who are not only incredibly capable but also deeply committed to protecting others. The presentation drew attendees from across the galactic academic community. Tom stood before an audience of hundreds of researchers, administrators, and government officials, feeling nervous but determined to share what they had learned. Professor Quillen began by presenting the raw data from their comprehensive testing, allowing the numbers to speak for themselves. The measurements were impressive by any standard, but he contextualized each capability within Earth's environmental demands: the crushing gravity that required incredible bone density, the unpredictable weather patterns that demanded enhanced sensory awareness, the presence of dangerous predators that made rapid reaction times essential for survival. But the most significant finding, Professor Quillen continued, is not what humans can do, but how they choose to use their capabilities. The holographic display showed footage from throughout the testing process, Tom carefully adjusting his grip to avoid damaging delicate equipment, Tom moving slowly through crowded corridors to avoid startling smaller students. Tom's immediate response to help others during emergency simulations, always putting their safety before his own. We have documented not just the physical evolution of a Deathworld species, Dr. Kella added, but the parallel evolution of social responsibility and protective instincts. Mr. Bradley represents a species that has become powerful not to dominate others, but to better protect their communities. The audience remained silent as Tom stepped forward to address them directly. He had prepared extensive remarks about human society and culture, but looking out at the sea of faces, he realized that simple honesty would serve better than elaborate explanations. I know many of you have been afraid of me since the gymnasium incident, Tom began. I understand why. The capabilities we've documented would be frightening if they belonged to someone with hostile intentions. But I want you to know that everything I can do, I've learned to do carefully. He gestured toward his teammates in the front row. When I first met Nira and Gex, I was worried about fitting in at a university filled with species I'd never encountered. Therefore, I never imagined that they would need to worry about me. But Earth taught my people that great capability requires great responsibility. We learned to be strong, not just to survive, but to help others survive too. Tom's voice grew stronger. As he continued, every human child learns to control their strength around smaller creatures. We're taught to move carefully in groups and to use our abilities to protect rather than intimidate. These aren't just cultural values, they're survival skills. On a world as dangerous as Earth, a species that can't cooperate and protect its members doesn't last long. Questions began coming from the audience, initially cautious but growing more confident as Tom answered each one honestly and thoroughly. A Korthic researcher asked about human social structures and whether their protective instincts extended beyond their own species. Tom explained humanity's long history of domesticating and caring for other animals, demonstrating that their protective nature wasn't limited to their own kind. A Delphinian administrator inquired about human emotional responses and whether their enhanced capabilities might lead to violent outbursts under stress. Tom acknowledged that humans certainly experienced anger and frustration, but explained how their society had developed extensive systems for managing conflict peacefully, precisely because they understood the consequences of violence among such physically capable individuals. As the presentation concluded, something remarkable happened. Instead of the fearful whispers and quick departures that Tom had grown accustomed to, the audience began approaching him directly. Students who had avoided him for weeks came forward with genuine questions about Earth and human culture. Faculty members discussed potential collaborative research projects. Even some of the government officials seemed intrigued by the possibility of humans serving as rescue workers or emergency responders in dangerous environments, where other species couldn't survive. Over the following days, Tom noticed a dramatic shift in how others interacted with him. The fearful avoidance was replaced by respectful curiosity. Students began joining him for meals again, asking questions about Earth's environment and how humans had adapted to such extreme conditions. Some even requested his assistance with physical tasks, recognizing that his strength could be helpful rather than threatening when properly applied. Nira and Gex officially invited Tom to continue as their research partner for future projects, and their friendship resumed with a new foundation of understanding and mutual respect. They had learned that knowledge truly was the antidote to fear, and Tom had learned that patience and openness could overcome even the deepest misunderstandings. The project's final report became a cornerstone document in galactic xenobiology, fundamentally changing how the scientific community understood deathworld evolution and the species that emerged from such challenging environments. But for Tom, the most important outcome was simpler. He could walk through the university corridors again without seeing fear in the eyes of those he passed. Professor Quillen submitted their research to the Galactic Council with a recommendation that Earth be considered for full membership in the galactic community. His report noted that humans represented not a threat to galactic peace but potentially its greatest protectors, beings evolved to thrive in conditions that would destroy others and dedicated to using their remarkable abilities in service of those who needed protection. Tom stood at his dormitory viewport one final time before the semester ended, looking out at the stars that connected his world to this vast community of civilized species. Tomorrow, he would return to Earth to share what he had learned about the galaxy, but he would also be returning as an ambassador for his people, carrying with him the knowledge that understanding could bridge even the greatest differences between species. His accidental revelation had transformed not just galactic science, but the future relationship between humanity and the stars themselves.